we are so close actually to developing technology that can help us actually help detect or predict when someone's starting to exhibit really early signs of cognitive decline before a formal dementia diagnosis may ever even be on the scene, for example. Um, so we have one project right now that's really looking at some of these indicators of pre-dementia, if you will, that are social. So one area, for example, is financial. We have a lot of emerging work, or I'm sorry, not just we being in the AgeLab, but gerontology more broadly has a lot of emerging work looking at different kinds of financial losses that can precede a formal dementia diagnosis, 6, 7, 8 years before someone actually ever receives a formal diagnosis from a doctor. So yeah, it's definitely a cutting edge space for sure.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to 45 Forward. I'm your host, Ron Roel. When was the last time you thought about what the world might look like at age 85? Imagine trying to read a label, navigate a busy sidewalk, or manage your finances while everything around you seemed designed for someone half your age. What if there were people who could not only imagine that future, but build it? Well, today we're moving from 45 forward to 85 forward as we meet an innovative researcher, Taylor Brennan of MIT AgeLab, who will be guiding us through her unique story. So, Taylor, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ron. I'm happy to be here.
I know about you guys. I've known about my AgeLab for quite some time, actually, since was the editor of the Act 2 section of Newsday in the early 2000s. And I remember reading about AgeLab and going, wow, interesting. Yeah, that's an interesting phenomenon. And it was innovative then. And so I'm delighted to have you many years later as part of the show. There's a lot to talk about, a lot about the lab, about your involvement and your research. I thought maybe I'd start, though, by, giving people a sense of just a taste of some of your work and perhaps some of your interaction with your folks 85 and plus, and perhaps, an experience with one of them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this afternoon from the Age Lab. We are a multidisciplinary research lab that was started back in 1999. We were under the direction of Dr. Joe Coughlin, who is still very much our director. And we are also sort of nestled within MIT Center for Transportation and Logistics. Our director Joe got his start with the lab in thinking about older drivers. We were really interested then in trying to understand how, auto insurers and families could really be having better conversations around driving retirement and driving cessation. And so that is one corner and one sort of area where our research really started. And I think in the spirit of, one of the themes of the podcast today and thinking about life at age 85 and beyond, we have since very much expanded our work. We really look across the lifespan about what the implications for sort of longevity really are and will be for people as we age. And so one of the more compelling, all the things I get to work on are really interesting to me in different ways. But one really interesting research panel that I run is focused on convening a group of 85 plus year olds, or the sort of oldest old, as we call them in the literature. And this is also one of the fastest growing age demographics in the US right now. And so with our ability to kind of convene that panel over time, I've been able to meet a lot of different octogenarians and nonagenarians who are similarly interested in helping sort of improve our day-to-day lives. And so with some of that work and with some of that research, I've been able to meet participants like someone I'll call Rhonda, for example, who is someone that came to us to participate in our panel with 85 plus year olds and had a really profound experience with hearing loss, for example. And she was we were convening a session on hearables, they're sort of called, this intersection of like technology for the ear and for hearing loss. And she, you know, sort of came to us with this like immense desire to sort of contribute to that work and learn more about how we were thinking about this issue. And then went back to her senior living community and actually not only like started learning about different kinds of hearables and sort of like audio amplifiers that she could get off of Amazon, like relatively, quickly and in a convenient way for her and her abilities at the time, but also she started making transformations to her unit in the senior housing community. And so she literally was like DIYing panels all over her room to help the noise bounce in a more sort of easier to hear way, and really like modified her built environment in direct response to that workshop. And so I think a story like hers really reflects the sort of powerful component that research can offer beyond us being able to listen to people's stories and take insight that people share with us and sort of use it to help transform businesses and governments and other organizations and how they do their work as well for an aging society, but also in how research can be a really empowering tool for individual participants in how they're able to sort of go about their lives after their interactions with us.
I think that hearing is an area, of course, that we think about as we get older. I do, at least because it's something that people think about. You lose your hearing, or it becomes auditorily challenged, but you learn how important it is to your functioning of everybody. And I remember listening to an audiologist talk about um, the relationship of hearing loss to Alzheimer's, and the fact that and we don't think about that, but it's you lose touch with the world if you lose your hearing. And so understanding, I think, that is important. And I remember her saying, when you listen to yourself, in a tape recording, you're like, well, that doesn't sound like me, and even just understanding that that's because you have an inner ear that you hear yourself when you're talking, not just from the outside, so it's important work, and I'm glad you're doing it. And um, so let me just step us back a bit and ask you about how did you get involved personally, in this field?
Yeah, I have a background in public health and in social work. I sort of first became exposed to the field of aging or gerontology when I was doing my bachelor's of social work degree at the University of Georgia. And so, a sort of hallmark of social work education is the ability to engage in like a field placement, which is sort of like applied learning, experiential learning, putting social work practice into action. And so, at the time, I was placed in a council on aging in that local community and was working with a couple of really innovative programs. And I still think they're innovative, even though that was a decade ago. I was working with grandparents who were raising their grandchildren. And so in that, yeah, so sort of in that space, I was exposed first to this kind of whole area of work that involved working with older adults and those who care for them. And so I knew that if I was going to kind of pursue kind of any sort of helping profession job in this space, that I needed a master's. And so I um, kind of pushed on and pursued sort of a combined, like a dual degree program, an MPH and an MSW is what they're called. And so, um, in that sort of time in graduate school, I was able to kind of explore more about gerontology from the research angle and try to understand, what this intersection of research and gerontology kind of looks like. And I think, to be perfectly honest, my first big girl job after that time, after graduate school, was with the AgeLab, and I'm still here and I never left. So I think I have grown to really love research as a tool for helping to understand, a lot of like larger societal like issues and topics, but also as a tool for being able to contribute in a way that I see is, obviously very positive to the world through my work.
Were there any particular moments when you can remember, like, this is it for me. This is what really excites me about, because it's something that, younger people don't think about that much. You have to sort of have a sense of vision looking ahead and saying, like, well, this is very different, but this is where we're all headed.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of interesting because I don't have a specific moment per se. I think I hear from a lot of younger students and interns that we often, encounter there's a lot of stories about grandparents and like really impactful elders in people's lives, which is not to say that my own grandparents and those sort of elders I've come across in my own life haven't been impactful by any means, but I think there kind of came, I guess, sort of a light bulb for me with the AgeLab work around the convening of multidisciplinary perspectives and this idea that there was this space in this lab that was doing social science research, which was what I was trained to do and was interested in doing, but was doing that research with many different perspectives. I'm the only social worker on our team. I'm really working in day to day with computer scientists, with human factors engineers, with psychologists and educators. And so it's like this very sort of intentional convening in that way. And it makes the work really fun in a way that is just not always the case in research, really. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about the lab. Just take a little deeper dive in terms of what the lab does, because it does a lot of different things. And I think the interdisciplinary approaches, as you mentioned, I think is very much part of it. I'm just looking at some of your background. I mean, it's it covers caregiving and well-being, home logistics and services, longevity and retirement planning, livable communities, the longevity economy. So perhaps take a couple of these and talk a little bit more, and also about just your particular approach, which I think is sort of the living lab approach, which I think is distinctive. Maybe talk about that first.
Yeah. So if you were to kind of pop up at the Age Lab today on any given day, you would very much see that we are a living and breathing and working lab. We've got, uh, I would say probably 25 to 30 folks in our group right now. We are using, I think, in the spirit of that sort of multidisciplinary perspective and sort of multidisciplinary ways of looking at these different kinds of research questions. That also lends itself to really dynamic methods that we're using in our work. So you can pop up any day and we might be convening, one of our 85 plus lifestyle leaders workshops in person, where you have kind of a whole gaggle of 85 plus year olds who are rolling into the lab for lunch for a couple of and for a couple of hours where they're kind of engaging in a series of focus groups with us. Or you could be seeing someone that almost looks like a robot walking around the floor. But it's really our AGNES suit, which is our age empathy suit. And it's a suit we frequently use with young MIT engineers or designers who haven't had the lived experience yet of being an older person, but who are designing products and services and technology for an aging society or for an aging consumer. And so maybe we are running a, sort of design sprint in our Agnes suit where we're having them do a whole bunch of series of consumer journeys in the suit.
Talk a little bit more about that, about this Agnes suit. It's not an Agnes, it's an acronym, but yeah, explain just a little bit more about how that, what it's.
Yeah, the acronym stands for the Age Gain Now Empathy System. Agnes was really first developed as a tool to help multidisciplinary teams get on the same page about who it was that they're designing for. We've used her in a whole bunch of different contexts. One that we really like to talk about is really in the transportation context. So we work with some of Agnes's early work involved working with designers of like cars, for example, literally the interior of your cab, the cab of the car that you sit in and drive in, and thinking about everything from how to ingress and egress out of the car to what it feels like to deal with some of the more like tactile points of the car, whether it's the infotainment system or the, like dealing with like driver assist systems or other kinds of buttons and things that buzz. And
What is the Agnes suit like, though, Taylor? What does it entail?
Yeah, so the suit itself is going to involve, a series of weights and bungees from head to toe. The pieces simulate some of the more common chronic conditions that can occur as we age. The suit generally is not going to be representative of what every older person's going to feel like, but we say, maybe a little bit more unhealthy a version of like a late 70s to early 80s person, maybe someone with some more unmanaged chronic conditions, arthritis or neuropathy, some kind of gait that's a little bit more off balance, some muscle loss, things like that. So, yeah, when we have Agnes in action, we are, really trying to understand the sort of friction, frustration, and fatigue that can really come up in some of the journeys that we're taking with Agnes.
Yeah. Yeah, it reminds me, I think I was working with someone who was involved in training for caregivers of Alzheimer's, people with Alzheimer's, and similar kind of, they kind of dressed me up in with gloves and things that made it sort of simulate like this could be the trouble that someone with dementia might have in performing daily tasks. So yeah, it's important to have that almost that sensory, experience that people might have.
Yeah, I mean, in the spirit of sort of MIT's education purpose, among one of its many purposes, right? It's sort of like a form of experiential learning and of a different way of knowing beyond. We certainly always pair our work with Agnes with, walk alongs with other older adults or interviews or focus groups as well. But it's just another tool in our toolbox to help us try to better understand what people experience.
So we're going to take a quick break, folks. It's be a very short break, but when we come back, we'll be talking much more with Taylor Brennan of AgeLab. So don't go anywhere.
Are you caring for an aging loved one? It can feel overwhelming, but you don't have to do it alone. Ron's book, The Caregiving Navigator, is a step by step guide designed to help you plan, prepare, and provide compassionate care with confidence. From organizing family conversations to navigating long term care and finding support for yourself, the caregiver, it's all here. Find the Caregiving Navigator now on Amazon and take the first step toward peace of mind.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward. I'm your host, Ron Roel. Once again, we're here with Taylor Brennan from MIT AgeLab. We're talking about a lot of what the lab does and what she's done in terms of using intergenerational insights and technology design and policy to help older adults thrive. So before the break, we were talking about some of the technology, Agnes, the AGNES suit and so forth. Let's talk broadly a little bit about, I mean, not a lot of what you deals broadly with the issues of ageism. So talk about how you folks approach ageism and how you tackle these issues.
Yeah. So we sort of started some of our work on ageism really with the Lifestyle Leaders panel. A lot of our work starts with this panel where we sort of think that if we have an idea about something or we're sort of curious about something, we can run it by that group. And if this group of participants thinks there could be something interesting there to better understand, then we often are able to kind of push forward from there with some of our research questions. And so that was the case in this example. We were sort of curious how this like sort of upper age of the age spectrum or the oldest old experience ageism in their everyday lives. And so we did a kind of our more typical session around that with this group. And then it was sort of very like poignant for them. Like they were sort of very, like they really enjoyed the topic to the extent that we were like, maybe we need to like dig a little deeper on this. And so we ended up also pursuing another study with the same age group, but a wider net beyond our panel, where we had people also engage in a qualitative methodology called photovoice, which involved sort of taking photos also of ageism in everyday life, in addition to like doing more of an interview and survey as well. And so, yeah, those data are kind of being looked at right now. And we've since then even launched another arm of the study where we're talking to 18 to 24-year-olds as well about their experience of ageism. So I'm hoping we'll be able to put those two really interesting sort of opposite ends of the age spectrum, if you will, into conversation with each other, and how that might look differently for each group.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit more about the younger group? Because it's something people don't think about, like, oh, ageism when you're younger, but of course there is, and there is ageism in terms of how they're perceived by older people.
Absolutely. Yeah. So definitely sort of think about ageism as happening kind of across the age spectrum and in different, ways at each sort of age or like life stage, if you will. There's also a term, though, and I'm trying to remember who exactly coined this term, but the term youngism is also sometimes used to describe like the sort of experience of being younger, having the experience of like different stereotyping or discriminatory related experiences about being younger, right? So maybe ideas that younger people are perceived as lacking experience or entitled or things like that.
Yeah, I think that some of us are now just sort of refer to, olders and youngers, which is because I even, now have you noticed in your tenure that, so you're dealing with a lot of 85 plus, of course, and people think, oh, that's really old, but doesn't seem so old anymore, especially when you get to my age. I'm just in the previous decade, but I can tell you that, and I think most people, or many people at least, when you say, well, how old do you feel? Many people say, they feel like 10 to 15 years younger than their actual chronological age. So it's been changing in terms of, I guess part of that is we're healthier, hopefully, more active. So the perceptions and the self perceptions are different. I know that, that when people join senior centers, I think in most cases, I think you just have to be like 60 to join senior centers, but most people don't join until they're in their 70s or 80s. And a lot of people will say like, well, senior centers, that's for old people.
Yeah, exactly. And we heard a similar theme in our study with the lifestyle leaders that, this idea that like maybe ageism doesn't happen to me, but it happens to others. And you're sort of like, say more about that. Like, why is that? And there's like interesting overlaps there with like other, issues around intersectionality and other identities that people hold that maybe buffer, if you will, like the impact of ageism, for example, if that's not something they're like experiencing a felt impact from. But yeah, it's interesting as well. I've certainly seen in more of my work in the community with professionals working in aging in Massachusetts, a shift away from, I know of a couple, senior centers in the state that are now changing like away from having any sort of age related designation, calling themselves like community centers even, and or not having like age requirements to engage in certain programs and things like that. So there certainly seems to be a shift in people's thinking around this issue. We used to do more work with teenagers through our program, our Omega programming, at the AgeLab. And one of the questions I used to ask teens at some of those events is this question: How old is old, or how old do you think old is? And to offer a counterpoint there, those answers will absolutely crack you up, right? Because I'm getting everything from 50 plus to 70 to 85 plus, and then you're like, you realize that sort of internalized or self-perception of age is really varied within, intra-individual differences. So,
Yeah, I certainly, I think it's shifted a lot. I can certainly remember growing up, and I can remember, um, watching my parents, have parties in the living room, and I would be sort of, hiding under the furniture, and watching, and I was thinking, well, these are old people, and thinking back, of course, like, yeah, they were probably in their 40s, or 50s. So, have you looked at sort of longitudinal differences as people, go from their 60s to 70s to 80s, and shifts in their attitudes or feelings or perceptions?
So we haven't done a ton of that yet around the ageism question for sure. It's certainly an area of future work. And we definitely need to sort of think about like how a study like this strand of research could be replicated with other age groups and like sort of how we might explore those experiences across explicit life stages. In some of our other work, we do, however, I want to at least acknowledge like we often will take more of like a life stage or life course approach in looking across the lifespan. In a lot of like our national surveys, we're often sampling people, for example, 50 to 59, 60 to 69, 70 to 79, 80 plus, things like that. So we can at least also look at nuances around a lot of questions, everything from housing, choices and how housing is changing for people as they age to transportation, how people are getting around and how that's changing as they age. And so, yeah, while we haven't done the best job at sort of linking those data longitudinally over time, we're certainly interested. Um, in looking at, sort of the range of experiences across the spectrum at any given point.
Yeah. Well, it does seem, I don't know if it's, I guess by your mid 80s, things, can change. I know that I think that people's now with longevity, I think now I guess the two things are, are finances and health. I think that people are worried about having enough money as they got older, but I think now it's also they're worried about dementia.
Yeah, there is a huge emphasis in this space right now on brain health. It's massively of interest. And I think some of that is a direct result of some of the shifts in our knowledge, right? We know that, more than we ever had before about the role of certain modifiable lifestyle factors, for example, in helping to enhance brain health and prevent cognitive decline. And we're sort of interested in too, like some of the technology around that, right? Like we are so close actually to developing technology that can help us actually like help detect or predict when someone's starting to exhibit really early signs of cognitive decline before a formal dementia diagnosis may ever even be on the scene, for example. Um, so we have one project right now that's really looking at some of these indicators of pre-dementia, if you will, that are social. So one area, for example, is financial. We have a lot of emerging work, or I'm sorry, not just we being in the AgeLab, but gerontology more broadly has a lot of emerging work looking at different kinds of financial losses that can precede a formal dementia diagnosis, 6, 7, 8 years before someone actually ever receives a formal diagnosis from a doctor. So yeah, it's definitely a cutting edge space for sure.
Now, we started talking about Omega, but talk a little bit more about what that is. Omega, which is, I guess, an intergenerational program. What does that entail? What are some of the salient features or programs or stories you can tell us about that?
Absolutely. So Omega is one of our program's really targeted at teens. And so, when we started it, we were sort of surveying the landscape of, intergenerational programs that are out there for sort of younger people and older people to connect. And we felt that teens were like a particularly underserved group by these programs because you might often see, for example, like a lot of shared sites, like senior housing communities co-located with daycares, or the opposite end of that spectrum being like university housing or like college students co-living with older adults in the community through like different kinds of co-housing websites or apps or things like that. So we thought teens were kind of being a little bit left out, and we were like, what would it look like to envision a program for this group? And this is a group, as we know, that's like there's a lot going on. There's a lot of college prep, for example, and like different kinds of knowledge building happening in that life stage, where like the pairing of olders and youngers could be really powerful. And so part of that program involves a series of sort of events that we put on where we're really exposing teens, even just like to this idea of longevity and aging and the way that the AgeLab thinks about these topics, and also what the concept of an intergenerational program even is. Our sort of hope there is that the students will be inspired and excited to build their own intergenerational clubs or programs within their own schools and in their own communities. And so the other part of that program for a long time has also involved a college scholarship. So for students who have actually gone on to implement some sort of intergenerational club or program, we've been able to offer a small scholarship for high school juniors or seniors who apply with those programs, and sort of us understand and illustrate, how their program is really pushing the envelope in that way, and that sort of Omega lens of bringing together olders and youngers.
Great. I want to talk much more about this, but we're going to take another quick break. So once again, folks, we've been talking with Taylor Brennan of MIT AgeLab, but we'll be coming right back with much more, so don't go away.
Do you like what you're hearing? Well, we've got plenty more where that came from. Head over to 45forward.org, where you'll find a full archive of over 200 episodes of the 45 Forward podcast, all hosted by Ron. Each week, Ron talks with fascinating guests, experts, advocates, and everyday folks, sharing insights and stories to help you live a better, fuller life in your second half. We cover everything from health and caregiving to careers, relationships, and finding purpose, whatever helps you move forward with clarity and confidence. That's 45forward.org. Check it out and keep moving forward. 40.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward. Once again, we're talking with Taylor Brennan of MIT AgeLab. Before the break, we were talking about lots of intergenerational issues. And I think, as we explore it more, I think there are relationships that we're discovering. I mean, interestingly, even the terminology, when we think about seniors, I'm thinking, well, seniors in high school, what, there are interesting transition points we have in life. And I think that, that as they look at issues like isolation and loneliness, I think they've discovered that there are these two periods of extreme senses of loneliness and dislocation. And one of them is in our early 20s, and one of them is our late 60s and 70s. And I think it's part of that is that they are periods where you go from a lot of structure to not so much. And you've got to figure out, well, a lot of anxiety, a lot of worry about what's next, and there are opportunities, but there's not a lot of guidance. So I think that there are some real lessons to be learned from these generational comparisons. They've also, I guess the Omega program talks on these intergenerational teams working on problems together. Anything that you want to talk about in terms of the kinds of some examples of solutions that people have produced?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen the gamut of programs and ideas. And, remember, these are sort of like programs or initiatives that the students themselves are running. And so that's really an emphasis to us. I think a lot of our Omega programs have a few things in common. One is that they're really creative, right? Like we're trying to look for like out of the box ideas. I've talked with some of our previous scholarship winners, for example, have been Banjo Club, Multigenerational Banjo Club. We've had folks, students do like a grocery program, a high school students grocery shop for homebound older adults, and, deliver the groceries and then also stay for like a conversation. Um, and so that's like a little bit more of like the instrumental support, right? And then also programs that maybe involve like arts, or I guess I just mentioned the banjo program, but a lot of interest in combining sort of interests around painting and drawing and different kinds of art classes. And then I think one other that comes to mind for me too was a student that worked on like more of a skills-based project. So like connecting teens that were interested in certain career pathways, right, with older folks who were perhaps retired from those same sorts of careers and more of like a knowledge sharing and like mentorship support type role. Yeah, so there's been a lot of really unique ways that we've seen students do this work. And I think, the other huge like area that of overlap that they share is this idea of innovation and sort of being able to be really innovative in how they're doing this stuff. And that's a program that's been running since I say 2016 or so. And so even through things like the COVID-19 pandemic, when high school classrooms were really disrupted, we've seen, these students get really innovative and do really interesting things with their programs.
Now, one of the areas is technology, of course, and I think that's something that interests me because the stereotype is, oh, older people good with technology, and I think some of that's breaking down. I think certainly as older baby boomers, or we're not digital natives, but certainly much more involved in technology. So what are we learning about, older and younger people dealing with technology, and what are the challenges, or are there differences, or are there different ways they use it or expect, and do they, older and younger, do they engage in looking at problems of using technology in different ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, so this is a really complex topic. And I would just emphasize too that technology adoption, acceptance, use, really goes across our research and it cuts across our work. It's infused into everything that we're really thinking about. And a lot of this work has been led by my colleague, Dr. Chai-Wu Lee at the AgeLab, who first did her dissertation, really thinking about what technology adoption, like what are those factors that influence technology adoption for older adults in particular, because she had found a gap in the literature around our understanding of technology adoption, even just for the older adult population. Like we're still sort of filling in our understanding of that gap in particular. And so when we bring in the intergenerational angle, I think one area we've seen really flourish in Omega has been like the learning aspect of technology and how olders and youngers can like help each other learn technology. I find that that's also still a huge gap in the work that has to be done. A lot of my 85 plus year olds will come and tell me, hey, you've showed me how to access the Google form for the workshop 20 times, but like I'm still not like I'm not retaining it. I'm not actually learning how to continue like use that or like whether it's a device or a software or whatever, there's like sort of a learning gap. For example, teens can like offer insight older adults around learning technology, and like sustaining that learning is really compelling and interesting, and it's certainly informing some of my interests as I move into doctoral research myself, thinking about the intersection of sort of age in our increasingly multi-generational workforce and how technology like AI that's now everywhere and on the scene and really popular right now, right? How that looks in like the organizational context, right? How we help like older workers, adopt AI, use AI in their workplaces, and what we can learn from like youngers about that as well, and what that sort of means for well-being and other kinds of like interesting organizational outcomes.
Are there particular issues that older people have with technology that younger don't? Is it just a matter of exposure or practice? Or, I mean, certainly, their social media is one area where younger people are much more involved, but it's not clear to me that sort of fluency extends to overall technological problems. And in some cases, I think that older people have more experience, so their sort of brains absorb a lot of different experiences, so they can solve certain problems faster, actually, than younger people, just based on their experience. So I'm still, trying to figure out what are the issues of technology that affect older people other than exposure.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's not right. I think you're getting at some of this as well. Like it's not that one group is like better than the other. at certain things, right? But it's like trying to understand where some of those nuances even are in the first place. And so we know, for example, that like older workers are, these workers maybe tend to lag behind workers of other age groups in their digital skills, including like, developing and adopting emerging technologies for work. But potentially there are things that we have yet to understand about how this age group, can like help sort of issue, can sort of like help organizations during digital transformation points actually um, like uh, contribute to like getting everybody sort of like on board with that digital transformation, right? And so yeah, I think there's sort of like a lot of gaps here still in trying to understand this. I think what this looks like in a workforce context is going to differ completely depending on the industry we're talking about or the occupation or job function. Um, yeah, so there's sort of a lot to still understand there. And like, olders have that, like to your point, right? Like that lifetime of exposure to different kinds of technology that youngers maybe don't, right, have in that kind of way. So even just like the difference in mental models across the age groups or the generations even um, is interesting all on its own.
Anything that you can recall in terms of being sort of surprised by their older person's understanding of technology or use of technology or insights about how to do something that maybe they wouldn't have had when they were younger?
I mean, we see it all the time with our panel for sure. Just as like a tiny example or, using them as a case study. The sort of stereotype that older adults are just like laggards in their technology adoption or that they're not using technology, right? Like these are just outdated stereotypes and it's simply not the case. And as you and I age, I'm going to be a much, savvier, different consumer of technology when I'm in my 60s and 70s, even relative, of course, to my grandparents' generation. So, yeah, that's to say that there are definitely people. Yeah, our elders are definitely adopting technology. I'll tie it back to the hearing story that we started with before. I think that is a really interesting one because, there's sort of like this one mental model of dealing with hearing loss in older age as involving, a pretty expensive, sort of finicky device that goes in the ear. But in doing that particular workshop with our lifestyle leaders, we learned that they're adopting, these like sort of non-prescription, behind the counter audio amplifying devices off of Amazon, right? They're also using things like AirPods, which weren't designed to necessarily be a hearing aid, right? But they have like different kinds of muting and amplification properties that people are just like hacking and like using to help them better interact with their environment. And so that's a really good example, I think, in that case, in the case of like hearables and this like class of technology of how our older adults might be very much are very much adopting technology, just maybe not in the ways that we would normally expect.
Yeah, it seems to me that a lot of it is just about learning and teaching and assumptions about what is required in that process. I mean, there are lots of times when, I'm faced with a technological issue in the computer, and it's just like, well, this isn't a matter of I'm just not with it or I can't figure it out. It's not intuitive. And the technology is set up by people who basically understand how they did it, but they don't, in some cases, understand how to explain it to you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, well, we're going to take another quick break, final break, and but don't go away, folks. We're going to have one terrific segment to go with Taylor Brennan of MIT AgeLab. So don't go away.
Caring for a loved one can feel overwhelming. That's why we created caregivingnav.com, your personal guide through the complex world of caregiving. It's a free interactive website built around the Caregiving Navigator book with tools designed to make your journey easier. Whether you're planning ahead, managing care right now, or navigating a crisis, you'll find step-by-step advice, trusted resources, and over a dozen downloadable checklists, from legal planning to home safety, from medical decisions to emotional support. It's all here, all in one place. Just visit caregivingnav.com because you're not alone on this path, and the help you need is just a click away.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward. We're talking with Taylor Brennan, a research specialist at MIT AgeLab. And before the break, we were talking about a number of intergenerational issues with respect to technology. I wanted to talk about some other things as well. Basically, we touched a little bit about intergenerational issues in the workplace, too. So I know you guys do a lot of work in that area. And I think it sort of ties into not only work issues, but I know part of your portfolio is dealing with caregiving issues as well and how to deal with that. So let's talk about those issues in terms of multi-generations in the workplace and what are the issues. Some of them are in the work itself and some of them are in personal issues like caregiving.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of this work that sits at the intersection of work and family is led by my colleague, Dr. Samantha Brady. And so um, with some of this work, we're really interested in trying to understand, I think, what the implications of the increasingly multi-generational workforce have for organizations and for this like sort of quote unquote future of work, which I think you see in a lot of the sort of business in the business world mentioned. So, I think right now, some of our work in this space has certainly dealt with family caregiving. We do run a panel of primarily US based, though it is international, family caregivers. So people caring for an adult loved one who are unpaid generally. With that group, we're able to really do a lot of work to try to understand the true labor that is caregiving. We're working right now, for example, on a study that looks at the cost of caregiving, both direct and indirect costs over time for those caregivers. So, really trying to understand at a very individual micro level over the course of even like a month, for example, what are the sort of, direct and indirect costs that people are kind of incurring in order to provide care. Um, and, Sam and I worked on a paper last year that was, leveraging one of our larger national data sets that we have in gerontology, generally the Health and Retirement Study or the HRS, to really look at how sort of combining work related and caregiver related roles ultimately impacts mental health, for example, and how those impacts maybe look differently for different demographics of workers. And so that paper was really interesting to work on and offered us like a little bit more insight into sort of, how something like depression, for example, can actually look differently and shift differently for different groups of people, depending on the types of caregiving roles that they actually enter into while also working. So that will give you a little bit of a taste of the flavor of some of our interests at that intersection of work and care. And then I think I'll just tie it back to some of our conversation from earlier about technology. But I think some of my interests also in this space around workforce development are again like interested in, how like digital skilling and digitalization sort of looks for different kinds of occupational contexts for different ages of workers. I'm also interested in the development of the aging services workforce as well. So outside of my work at the AgeLab, but this group is also partnered with the AgeLab. There's a Massachusetts-based organization called Boston Bridge. Um, and we're really interested in helping, sort of offer different kinds of professional development for people that are working in this space. And so as, you might imagine, right? People working in aging services span a spectrum. We know people in, more traditional aging services, social workers providing services at senior centers, to people that are building technology in the age tech space, right? That are creating those products, to people that are maybe working more like in the financial services sector or kind of helping support family caregivers directly. And so all of those folks need professional development in some form, thought leadership in some form. And as this field continues to sort of grow and become increasingly technology enabled and the like, I'm also sort of interested in what's going on there and how professionals are thinking about some of these shifts within the field, if you will, too.
What sorts of things do they need to know that they might not think they realize as they enter this field?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's certainly like a sort of common need for like credentials, like CEUs, they're called, or continuing education units, which are associated with a lot of like health professional licenses and like ongoing requirements around licensure, which Boston Bridge hasn't traditionally sort of offered those sorts of things. But I would say that the group's interest is in really convening like thought leaders in this space, bringing those folks to professionals. So the group has had, everyone from like our state AARP director to our state, Massachusetts has an office of aging independence to like the city of Boston aging commissioner has come in. So it's like kind of a whole host of different kinds of leaders in the field to try to get people an understanding of like both like the breadth of what work in the space can look like, but also like what different sorts of career trajectories can look like.
So, just reflecting a little bit about your own career and your own learning in this space, what are some of the things that you learned about aging that you didn't expect?
Yeah. Yeah. I think our director, Joe, likes to use this phrase like aging is an extreme sport, which I completely agree with. But also for me, that aging can really be very fun, even though it's a very complicated time of life as we're sort of touching on all these different domain areas that, has to do with age and longevity. So there truly are ways to make aging fun, cool, interesting, we've seen through our work here. And that's something that I have learned in my time at the lab and that I also hope to hold on to as I continue to work in this space.
When you say an extreme sport,
I think in traditionally the context of using AGNES or age empathy suit and thinking a little bit about some of the real challenges that people face as part of aging and sort of the biological aging process too. It's certainly not for the faint of heart, right? This is sort of the reality of living. If you're aging, you're living. So there's sort of, I think, a lot of emphasis on some of that in that sort of slogan.
yeah, it's consider the alternative, right? Yeah, yeah. And anything about some of your assumptions that changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll certainly tag us back to sort of the Omega programming stuff. I think a lot of our work there has been really interesting to me in terms of also like helping to really better understand what teens face these days too, right? I'm not a teen anymore, and so my experience of being a teenager was very different than the teens that we are working with and we encounter today. And so I think just to just speak to that point before about this idea of like any beliefs that I had that had connections to youngism or this idea that, teens are inexperienced or don't know, what they're talking about or something like that has certainly been completely shifted in light of our sort of Omega programming.
Yeah, I think it's sort of our technological approach to human development, I think has been challenging in the sense that we split up the generations and we split up ages and we split up seniors from, we have childcare and elder care. And I think now we're starting to bring some things closer together, in what I call sort of more of an ecological as opposed to a technological perspective of specialization. So I think that things like housing are something we're really taking another look at.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and that makes me think too about, like, that these sorts of challenges or, like, problems that we're talking about are not just the experiences or issues of individuals rather, but, like, the sort of collective way that we have sort of implemented systems in our society, right, around some of these topics, that this isn't just just because Rhonda couldn't hear, it's not just like her problem that she couldn't hear and like needs a better device. It's like also thinking about how the built environment contributes to that, how her ability to get around is going to affect the extent to which she gets to that audiologist appointment. And the idea that that whether or not she has disposable income to purchase the extra amplifier devices off of Amazon. Like these are not just individual problems of Rhonda, right? But rather also how she's interacting within our larger social system.
So, sort of last thoughts. Other than getting involved in getting a degree or an academic degree or getting involved in Boston Bridge, and any thoughts on if people are interested in aging issues and the future of aging, are there little things they can do to think about these issues or get involved in some way?
Absolutely. We have all of our stuff is on our website at agelab.mit.edu. We have a monthly newsletter our team puts out that is fabulous, and I highly recommend folks sign up for that. We have panels going on at any given time. Right now, we're working on our 85 plus panel and our family caregiving panel. We also have a panel for financial professionals. So if you or someone you know is a financial advisor, counselor, anyone that sort of helps somebody with finances. We're sort of building out a panel around that because it's very related to aging and how people plan to age. Um, and then we also have a database that we kind of just call like our general volunteer database, which is really for anyone of any age to join. And as there are study opportunities available where we are looking for potentially you, that is a database that we tap into for that as well.
Hmm. So people can get involved remotely, or they don't have to be at the lab to be involved.
Exactly. Yeah. Most of our stuff these days, honestly, is conducted over Zoom or online.
Yeah, and I guess there's field work as well. I mean, you go into yeah.
Yeah, for more of we didn't even talk today about some of our work that's still happening around driving, but we have a whole team that's doing work in transportation and driving and looking at how people interact with technology in the vehicle these days and as they age. For a lot of that work, you have to often be able to come into our lab in Cambridge or drive a vehicle also in the Boston area. Those studies involve more of a experimental or in the field element for sure.
Challenging at any age, driving in Boston or Long Island. It's yeah. So wow, there's much more to talk about. Maybe next time we'll dive deeper into driving and other issues. But there'll always be stuff for us to talk about. So I want to thank you. And now, people have more questions or comments. How would they get in touch with you?
Yeah. You can also find me on our site, and my MIT email is trpats@mit.edu.
Okay. And again, the website is agelab.mit.edu.
Exactly.
Okay, once again, folks, this is Ron Roel from 45 Forward. Thank you for spending this hour with us, helping us all make the journey through the second half of life even better than the first. If you want to see a full archive of my shows, what's coming up, you can go to 45forward.org. And if you want to send me comments or questions or suggestions or sign up for our monthly newsletter, just send me an email at ron.roel@gmail.com. So until our next episode, keep moving forward, 45 Forward.